This controller will make you rethink what's possible in controllers. Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. I'm OP, and it's been a while since I did a controller review video, but here we are. I want to give a shout out to Input Labs for sending me this amazing, beautiful controller to review and share my thoughts on with you fine people. So the first thing you'll notice with this controller is, man, this looks really cool. It's a really nice looking controller. It's got sharp angles. It's kind of like a low polygon model that belongs in a Nintendo 64 game. But what makes this controller so unique is the fact that it's open source and it's 3D printed. The fine folks over at Input Labs have all the files that you need to download and build one of these at home. Now you will need to purchase some other things like the thumbstick, the buttons, the mouse wheel, and the board that you have to, have a little bit of soldering skills. But with a little know-how, you can build one of these yourself. As long as you have access to a 3D printer, of course, or if you know somebody that does. At the moment, you can't buy a finished Alpakka controller like this one. You have to build it yourself or know somebody that knows how to build it and then buy it off of them. Or if they're nice, maybe they'll give it to you. So besides the fact that this controller is totally open source and 3D printable, the other thing that makes it really unique is the fact that you'll notice that there is no right thumbstick at all. That really threw me off whenever I first saw that. There's no right thumbstick at all, which is kind of strange because having two thumbsticks on the controller has been a staple, a standard, since DualShock. In place of a right thumbstick, this controller actually has two gyroscopes in it that activate whenever you press your thumb on the middle in between the four face buttons. If you press and hold your thumb there, it activates the gyroscopes, and then you physically move the controller to simulate the movement. So yeah, instead of the right thumbstick, you get the gyroscope movement, and it's very accurate and works quite well. It does take some getting used to, but it does work well once you get the hang of it. So for example, you can use the gyroscopes to aim in a first-person shooter, which has quite good accuracy, but it does, like I said, it takes some getting used to, and you kind of have to rewire your brain after playing first-person shooters on consoles the same way for over 2.5 decades. And as you're learning how to use this controller in a first-person shooter, you will move and look around like a drunken monkey. I know I did, and I still do. And one thing to note is that the Alpakka controller comes with 4 pre-configured profiles. These profiles have different button layouts depending on what type of game you're playing and what you're using it for. And to switch between these profiles, you have to hold the middle button and then press one of the 4 directions on the D-pad, and then whatever profile you have selected is indicated by the LED in the middle of the controller. So for example, the up profile is going to be your standard mouse and keyboard, so Windows will recognize it as a mouse and keyboard, and the down profile is a controller and mouse, so the computer recognizes it as a standard third-party controller and a mouse. And as of this moment, there's no way to customize the profiles easily. It comes with default firmware already installed on the main board, but you have to rewrite your own firmware at the moment to customize your own profile. So that's not very user-friendly. Eventually it will change. Input Labs has said that they're working on it, but for now, you kind of have what it is out of the box. So for example, if you play a lot of emulation, whether it's PS2 or GameCube, you can't map the gyroscopes to what would be the right thumbstick because none of the profiles recognize the gyroscope as a traditional right thumbstick. Basically, all the profiles recognize the gyroscope as a mouse. So your game selection might be a little bit weird whenever it comes to configuring the controls. Some of them might work beautifully, and other ones might not work at all the way you expect them to. The current design of the Alpakka controller also doesn't have a USB-C port. It has a micro USB port to plug it into the computer, and there's no force feedback. So these are things that Input Labs has mentioned that they may work on in the future, that they have plans for, but as of right now, as of the recording of this video, this is what it is. It's a micro USB, no force feedback, which doesn't bother me at all. I don't really mind having non-vibrating controllers. It doesn't bother me at all. And it's actually quite comfortable to hold. Whenever you're holding this thing, it doesn't feel clunky and weird in your hands. It feels quite comfortable. I will say that the triggers on the back are a little bit sharp on the edges. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but it's definitely a little bit less comfortable. It's the least comfortable component of the controller. But I tested a few games with this controller just to give you my thoughts on how the buttons work, the D-pad, the gyroscope functionality, and here are my thoughts on those. Here you'll see me playing Quake using this controller. And as you can tell, I'm still a noob. I'm still getting the hang of this controller. It feels a little bit strange and unnatural at first, and even after playing with it for a few days, it's still not fully registered in my brain how to move correctly. So it's not the controller's fault. The controller actually works beautifully and perfectly. It's just me. I'm a total spaz and I can't rewire my brain quickly enough to actually be really good at it. So I imagine that you could be, because you do get the precision of a mouse and keyboard, like the precision of the aiming. But it's like your brain doesn't understand how to take full advantage of that precision. At least mine doesn't. But I know that you can. But yes, Quake works beautifully with this controller. If I use the controller profile, which is the down profile, Quake sees it as a third-party controller and the movement as a mouse. And luckily they work together to create a seamless experience. And it works beautifully and really well. And if you've been subscribed to my channel for a while, you would know that I love retro games. Older games are like my jam. That's what I play the most, and that's what I enjoy the most. So that's what I use this on. The next game I tested this on was Doom 64. And whoa, this is awesome. I think this is my new favorite way to play Doom 64 is with this controller, because for one, it makes it easier to use this controller and get used to it. It's kind of like training wheels, because Doom 64 doesn't have a Y-axis. You can't look up or down. It's just side to side, and that's all you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about looking like a drunken monkey. You can just play the game and enjoy it. And I really love Doom 64. This is my favorite Doom game, okay? I'm going to be honest. I might be in the minority, but Doom 64 is my personal favorite Doom game. And now I have a new favorite way to play my favorite game, so it's like a double whammy. I love it. And yeah, that would go for pretty much any of the classic Doom games or the earlier first-person shooters like Wolfenstein 3D. You can basically use the Alpakka controller to do the left and right aiming movement. Now, if you're using the up profile, in which Windows recognizes it as a keyboard and mouse, and that's another thing I forgot to mention, this controller has no software or drivers. You just plug it in, and the computer will automatically recognize it as whatever it is. Mouse and keyboard, or a third-party controller and mouse. So it's like it already knows what those devices are, and it thinks that this is those devices. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, when you're using the up profile, this controller is basically seen as a keyboard and mouse, which makes it perfect for certain games like Warcraft II or Day of the Tentacle. Pretty much any of these games where you have to use the mouse extensively to point and click and do several tasks, you can do it all with this controller. And what's pretty cool is that this controller was designed to be an alternative to the traditional controllers and traditional control schemes for PC games, like point and click games. Like, let's say you want to play Day of the Tentacle, but you want to play it while sitting on your couch. It can be a little bit non-ergonomic to have a mouse and keyboard set up on your couch and relaxing. So this is a perfect solution for that, because you could just chill out, point and click, do what you got to do using this controller. And it works beautifully. Pointing and clicking is actually much easier to wrap your brain around than aiming in a shooter, at least for me it was. And I loved it. It clicked right away, and I had a lot of fun with it. And with a little bit of practice, you can get really precise and get really good at these little tiny, minute movements that you would normally become accustomed to with a mouse. You can do those same things with this controller, and it works beautifully. It just takes a little bit of training with your brain to get it to do what you want to do. So it's been an uphill battle for me personally, because I am in my early 40s and I've been playing games since I was a kid, and this is unlike anything I've ever used. So it's like I have to unlearn everything I've ever learned and then figure out how to use this controller. It works, like I said, it works beautifully. It works perfectly for what it does, but it's like my brain just can't wrap my head around it very easily, but it does work. But I want to move on to the buttons and the D-pad specifically. The buttons seem to be raised a little bit more than I would personally like. That's kind of one of my only gripes with the controller, is that the face buttons, they do kind of raise up off the surface of the controller quite a bit, so it feels like you have to really press them down pretty far to get them to go all the way down, which is not a deal breaker. I mean, I can play games with it no problem. It's just that it seems kind of uncomfortable to have to depress it that much to get it to activate. Again, it's not a huge problem, and I kind of gotten used to it, but I would like to see that kind of decrease a little bit, like 50% decrease on that height level would be great. And the same thing goes with the D-pad. The D-pad, it works, totally functional. Here's some footage of me playing Killer Instinct 2013 with this controller and the D-pad. Of course, Killer Instinct, being a fighting game, doesn't use the gyroscope in any way. It just uses the regular buttons and the D-pad. And it works great, no problem at all. It's just that the controller D-pad has this space in between the four directions if you're looking at it closely, and that can cause some problems when you're trying to do quick left and right movements or quarter circle motions on the D-pad. It doesn't feel very smooth, and it results in a lot of dropped inputs and dropped combos. Again, for me, I've played it a lot and I've gotten more used to it, so I'm getting more consistent with pulling off the special moves, the combos, and doing what I'm trying to do. I've gotten better at it, so I know it can be done. It's just, it doesn't feel very intuitive whenever you're coming from an older style, more traditional controller. I would almost rather the Alpakka controller's D-pad be a solid cross. Just up, down, left, and right, solid. A solid piece, rather than 4 distinct buttons that are separated with an empty space in between, because yeah, going from left and right or doing quarter circle motions are very uncomfortable and they don't always come out the way you want. But I'm going to leave a ton of links in the description below for all kinds of stuff. The Input Labs direct website where you can download these files directly to build your own Alpakka controller if you have access to a 3D printer. Some other YouTube channels and other videos where people are assembling these things. I'll put a link in the description below for the profiles, like a description of what the profiles are and how they work, because that's something you're going to be really interested in becoming familiar with. If you're going to be using this controller, you want to know what profile does what and how the computer recognizes each profile. But yeah, this is basically just the beginning of this controller's lifespan. Like I said, it hasn't been out for very long. This is a brand new baby. So the technology exists, and this might be a game changer, literally, pun intended. Moving forward, this has a lot of potential to really reshape what we think about controllers and what we think they can do. I guarantee you that if we started out with this, if we were playing Time Splitters 2 on the PS2 or the GameCube using one of these with gyroscope sensors, it would feel really weird at first, but by now we would all be pros and be amazing at it. And I think that if you have a pro playing with one of these, they'll be just as good, if not better, than somebody using a mouse and keyboard. Definitely be running circles around the people still using the right thumbstick, because that's limited to your movement in terms of how quickly you can move. If you have better fine motor skills than you're going to have a lot better luck playing than I did. Although I still found my way around and I did pretty well. I still have a long way to go before I master it, that's for sure, but I do love this controller. And it's really cool being able to play these classic first-person shooters like Doom and Quake, and being able to switch and cycle through your weapons using the built-in mouse scroll wheel that functions identically to how it does on an actual mouse. It's really cool. It's a very interesting experience because I've played a lot of first-person shooters on both console and PC, and this is kind of like a mixture of both, and I think I like it the most, especially, like I said, with these classic Doom games and the classic first-person shooters. This is a great way to experience those games. But Input Labs, you've done a great job with this 3D printable Alpakka controller. I salute you. Thank you very much for the review unit. I really appreciate it again. So now I'll leave you with the raw footage that I recorded of me playing these various games: Quake, Doom 64, Killer Instinct, Day of the Tentacle, and Warcraft II. As always, thanks for watching, and have an awesome day.
You Aha! A secret passage. This is all too easy.
Sunset. Loktar. Loktar. Sunset. Loktar. Sunset. Smoke are being attacked. Damu. Sunset. 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 Swivel. Gloptar. Dabu. Swivel. Gloptar. Gloptar. Sunset. Sunset. Gloptar. Hitok. Sunset. Swivel. Gloptar. Dabu. Swivel.